What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this edition of Afterthoughts, recapping UFC Moscow, headlined by ZABIT, Magomed Sharipov, and Calvin Kattar in a annoying three-round main event. It was a fun fight. I think it was one of those fights, though, that it would have been different had it actually been 5 rounds. Zabit clearly won the first 2 rounds. Kattar clearly won the third round. It is one of those fights where I think when you analyze it, it's very similar to Yair Rodriguez, Jeremy Stevens, where had it gone an additional 2 rounds, I think the result would have been different. So it's a little annoying for that perspective in that they kind of screwed Kattar in this instance. I think it should have been a 5 round main event just because I think all main events should be 5 rounds regardless of whether or not they're on short notice, whether or not they're title fights. They should all be 5 rounds. That goes with the title main event. And what I got from it was that it was kind of, I didn't really take too much away from that fight. My opinions on Zabit are pretty much the same as they were going in, which is he's a talented guy. He has all sorts of martial arts at his disposal. His base is so clean. He is one of these newer generation fighters who is just well-rounded and well-groomed from the start. So I do think he has a bright future, and I'm not saying he doesn't, but I really didn't gain any sort of new perspective on him, and I really don't think he should fight for a title next. I don't think he's ready for that. Whether it's Holloway or Volkanovski, who wins on December 14th, I don't think he's ready for either one. I think either one would beat him down. But when you really look at featherweight right now, and you look at the title picture, after that title fight, who's really next, And that's kind of where I'm a little conflicted here, because if Max Holloway somehow, well, not somehow, I think Max Holloway rightfully will be the favorite in that fight, but if Max Holloway beats Alexander Volkanovski, he's not really going to have very many contenders at featherweight to go, to fight next. So I think it's one of those things where I'm not sold on Zabit as the next contender, but who the hell else is there? I don't think you give it to Yair Rodriguez just yet. We've already seen Frankie get it. We've already seen Ortega get it. Now, if Korean Zombie beats Ortega, I think he rightfully would probably be next. It's a weird situation at featherweight right now because I really don't think Zabit is at that level yet. But there really isn't anyone else right now. Maybe match him up with Yair Rodriguez. That's the first thing that came to my mind after this fight. Two guys coming off of big wins. Yair obviously getting that decisive win over Jeremy Stevens. Well, maybe not decisive. It was very similar to this win that Zabit had, though. Two very exciting martial artists. I think that fight makes a lot of sense. Winner would probably be next in line for a title. But Zabit's he's a really talented guy. His gas tank is still very much of a concern, though. And I don't think he's ready for that Holloway-Volkanovski level just yet. He's close, but I still want to see him in a 5 round fight before he gets that shot. Because I think if he fights Max now, or Volkanovski now, it would not be pretty for him. Calvin Kattar is a fun guy. Fun guy to watch, entertaining, and I do think he's going to be around for a long time. I've always kind of equated him to Jeremy Stevens. Going into this fight, I thought to myself, probably going to go the way the Stevens fight went with Zabit, where Kattar's going to land some shots, but Zabit's probably going to do most of the work. And that is, sure enough, what happened. I think Zabit's probably a more technical, a little bit more skilled version of Jeremy Stevens. He's a little bit too simple. He's a fun fighter. He's an entertaining guy. I don't see him being a champion. I don't even really see him being a top contender. I do see him being a top 15 guy for the foreseeable future, but I really don't see him making a lot of noise past that top 15. I don't see him beating any guy in the top 5, unless it's like a brawl-heavy guy, maybe like an Ortega, but even then, I think Ortega's ground game would probably be too much. I think Kattar just needs to compound his game a little bit, for lack of a better term. I think he needs to add a few more wrinkles into it to give him some sort of edge that he seems to lack right now. He carries a lot of knockout power, as we saw against Ricardo Lamas, but he struggles in fights where guys tend to be a little bit more creative and tend to have a little bit higher fight IQ than he does. In the Renato Moicano fight, we saw that. The Andre Fili fight, Fili probably has a little bit more at his disposal, but Fili doesn't have the fight IQ that Kattar has, nor does he really have the technique that Kattar has. So I think for Calvin Kattar, if he really wants to take that step up, he needs to work on that fight IQ, get a little bit more creative inside that octagon, because right now I think his game is just a little too simplistic. I think he's too one-dimensional. It's pretty obvious, to see what he wants to do. He wants to come in with that overhand, maybe just cover it with a couple of jabs. Nothing really more than that. And it's a lot of guys are like that, and he definitely is really good at his trade. But if he wants to be a champion, he needs to add some wrinkles into that game. Moving on to the co-main event, and I'm only going to talk about these two fights because really outside of these two, there wasn't really much to talk about on the card. I mean, there was some excitement. I'll probably cover that in the podcast, but for Afterthoughts, we're only going to talk about really the two main fights because there really wasn't any other bout that brought as much impact as these two. But nonetheless, the co-main event, Alexander Volkov and Greg Hardy. Now, the fight went the way I think most people anticipated it to. Volkov controlled the action, landed his shots effectively, kept Hardy at a distance. Hardy wasn't able to close on him. Hardy did land some shots on him. Landed some good overhands. We found out, of course, his arm had broken, I think, midway through the first round. So, you're going to have people saying, well, what would have happened had Hardy not broken his hand or whatever? And I think that's moot. The fight's happened. It is what it is. But what I really want to take away from this fight is, well, looking at the fight specifically before we really dive into it a little bit more, was this fight more about Volkov underachieving or Hardy overachieving? And perhaps more specifically, is Volkov mediocre and is Hardy a lot better than we think? Now, obviously, Volkov's beaten some tough guys. I mean, Stefan Struve, when he fought him, that was a crazy fight. Showed a lot of grit in that fight when he beat Fabricio Verdum, lost the first two rounds, came back, and knocked out a guy who, I mean, Fabricio Verdum is one of the toughest SOBs in the game. So, Volkov definitely has skill. But when you look at his last two performances, the Derek Lewis fight was, I mean, he looked great in that fight, didn't really punctuate shots, and then, of course, Lewis caught him. In this fight, Hardy landed some big shots on him, but Hardy was injured. We don't really know, what it would have looked like had Hardy been completely healthy. Would Hardy have knocked him out if he was healthy? Because he landed on him. And I really do wonder if this is more about Volkov maybe not taking Hardy as seriously. Maybe it was the quick, turnaround of opponents he had. Maybe it was the fact that just, he drops from the main event to the co-main event. He's got to readjust for 3 rounds as opposed to 5. There's a lot of different factors you could put into it. But ultimately, I think when you look at it, the one big takeaway from this fight was Greg Hardy, whether you like him or not, he has a very bright future. He's a very, very talented prospect. The fact that he could go in there with a guy like Volkov, again, a guy who's knocked out Fabricio Verdum, a guy who, for all intents and purposes, was going to beat Derek Lewis had it not been for that late Hail Mary knockout, a guy who is a former Bellator world champion. The fact that Hardy was able to even stay in there with him, with the injury no less, he didn't quit, he didn't use the inhaler or anything like that. The fact that all of this happened means, again, whether you like him or not, Greg Hardy is going to be around for a long time, and he has a very bright future in this sport. Now, I'm not christening him as champion. I'm not going to say, well, he's going to go in there and he's going to beat Ngannou, and he's going to beat Curtis Blades, and he's going to beat Rosenstruik, and he's going to beat all these guys that, are just fantastic athletes just like him. I don't think Volkov has the athleticism that Hardy does. I do think that played a factor in the fight. And I do think there are guys more athletic than Hardy, of course, but I think regardless of what you think of Greg Hardy, you can't deny the fact that the guy is talented. He is I think, going to be a high-level fighter in the very near future. He's going to be ranked by this time in 2020. Maybe a top 10, might even be a top 5 guy at this point. And yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the UFC does with him going forward. This was a huge fight for him, a huge feather in the cap, getting a lot of experience against a guy like Volkov. Will the UFC match him up against a top 15 opponent next? It remains to be seen. I would not be surprised if they do. Maybe a guy like a Sergey Pavlovich, another guy who hits hard, a guy very similar to Greg Hardy, a guy who's, I think, teammates with Volkov. It'll be interesting to see. But again, Greg Hardy, you can't deny the fact the guy's got talent. And that's official now. We've seen him beat these lower level guys. He goes in there, loses a decision to Volkov, but looks somewhat decent in the process. I think at ATT, Dean Thomas, Mike Brown, they're going to really do wonders with him. I don't think he's going to be champion necessarily, but I think he's really going to be a name to look out for going forward. And he's got a very bright future at heavyweight. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching this edition of Afterthoughts. My name's Johann Castro. Tune in next time, and I'll see you guys later.